one thing I really liked that you brought up is the customizing the resume for the job application. That's one of the things that I kind of hit on with people is you want to have your maybe you have a longer form resume that has all of your experience and that's your basic one that you go off of. But for every application, you're customizing, you're tailoring it, you're cutting it down to that job application. So you have basically you're kind of constantly updating your resume throughout the application process. You're not just slapping the same thing together and sending it everywhere. That'll improve your success. Now I have a couple of I've expressed a couple of different opinions and I've heard a couple of different opinions about resumes. So quickly, I'd like to go through a couple of them with you and kind of get your
Okay.
take as somebody. So first of all, is there any level of experience at which it makes sense to have more than a one-page resume?
Well, I think some of that has to do with years of experience. Now, this is another problem. Everybody is at a race to see how many jobs they can have in a short period of time. This is a big bugaboo. I mean, people think that the more jobs they have, the more experience they have to offer. But to most employers, they see that as job hopping.
Yeah.
So don't go back more than, if you have anybody with a little bit more experience in entry level, don't go back more than 10 years. First of all, things that were done 10 years ago aren't done the same anymore. And also, it just lengthens a resume and it may add stuff to it that people during the interview, if you get one, are going to really want to drill down on and say, well, why did you change? You've had 5 jobs in the past 3 years. Why do you keep changing jobs?
Yeah.
Then you got to defend yourself. You're not selling yourself anymore. You're defending yourself. Say, well, and there's reasonable explanations. Company closed down, company merged, they had a general
Yeah.
layoff. We get that. Or maybe they've done some consulting. I mean, I get resumes with 30 or 40 jobs on them, and people forget in parentheses next to them not to put the word consulting. They should. Because then we think, gee, were these regular full-time jobs? He lost them all, or she lost them all. Oh no, consulting. That's a different story.
Yeah.
You knew from day one that that job had an expiration date, and that's fine. But I think that it's very important to keep it as short as possible. If you have a lot of years of experience and it's good experience, and you keep it under 10 years, yeah, you're going to have a few more jobs. You may go to a page and a half, maybe 2 pages. But I've had 15-page resumes, and they're written like doctoral theses sometimes. I mean, there's all sorts of jargon all over it, assuming that people really know what all this stuff is, because even though we're in engineering, there's a lot of engineering things we don't do. And, you got to sit there and try to figure out, what does that mean? Is that something we do? So try to keep it simple. Maybe write it to an eighth grade education. Try to keep it really every fact or point on there should be an additional reason for that employer to want to see you. That's a good rule of thumb, by the way. If you took a basket weaving course in college, keep it off there. Nobody wants to see that. You
Yeah.
want to just basically show that what we're looking for is that trying to find a candidate that needs the least amount of additional training. That's a win for us, because if we have to train people from scratch, it takes time and cost. So if you have stuff that you did on an intern or a co-op, please include that. Be specific. Some people will just put the company they worked at and the dates and nothing under it. What did you do there? That tells me nothing. So think about it. I always say, make believe you have $30,000 of your own money and you're starting your own little business and you're going to hire somebody. All of a sudden, there's a sense of importance to who you hire. You're going to leave them there. They're going to be in charge of maybe your cash register or whatever. So you're going to really scrutinize those individuals and make sure that you're confident that this is somebody you really want dealing with your customers, working with cash, etc. So my point is, take pride in that resume, understand what the importance of it is to an employer, and tailor that resume to show your best.
So speaking of showing your best, skills section or no skills section?
Yes, I agree. Skill sections are important.
Do
That's
you
my
rate
thought.
the level of proficiencies of the skills, or do you just give them as skills?
Oh, they're going to be technically assessed. Absolutely. That's not my role because I'm not an engineer. But when they
Yeah.
get into the next round, they're going to be asked some questions and perhaps even given some paper pencil testing, or as we
Wow.
call it, because sometimes it's done on a computer. Well, we want to do that for a couple of reasons. First of all, we want to know what they know. And we all also want to know what is their thought process in troubleshooting and solving problems. So we'll have them actually sit with somebody who's a qualified engineer, and we'll say, this is the issue. How would you handle it? And then they'll walk you through the steps. And then you'll say, well, gee, that's an awful long approach. And somebody who really knows the stuff pretty well, they'll know how to get from point A to point B better. And through our experience, we know what the answers generally are. So now we can do a little of our own data analysis and say, we had 6 people in here last week. 3 of them really answered those questions correctly. And they're all within, the same year of college graduation. So maybe this particular candidate isn't as strong as one of those others. So the more we interview, the more we approximate what we're looking for, who does best versus the rest of the group.
Do you place any stock in if somebody ranks their own proficiencies on their resume, or is it really not really that valuable?
Well, that's something that shows us confidence. Are they confident about their skills? You get a lot of people you could tell that don't have a lot of confidence in their abilities. They're very apologetic, or they'll fudge things. Somebody who tells you that I have a lot more to learn about that is sometimes a better candidate than the person that comes in and says, "Oh, I know all of this," and then we end up technically assessing them and we find out that they don't. That's not being honest and truthful. You got to be honest and truthful about yourself. If you don't know something, say it. Uh, you're not necessarily out of the game. There may be other things that we weight a little bit more heavily and say, like I said earlier, well, maybe you don't know this that well, but you know that. And, you know, there's no ideal candidate. So employers have to settle sometimes a little bit in certain areas. Say, well, okay, you don't have SCADA, but you're very good at programming and you're good at field service work. We'll train you to the SCADA. But if you say you have a lot of it and you're technically assessed and you don't, that's a whole different ballgame.
How about GPA? When does it make sense to leave a GPA off of a resume?
I guess when it's low. I don't know
What?
that companies our size really don't put too much stock in that. I think that there are the real big companies out there that do. I think for them it's a matter of pride that they think they got the best and brightest. But that's book knowledge. It's a whole different world out there when you get to work. Book knowledge doesn't count for that much. How do you perform? Do you think on your feet? Are you somebody that when I'll do a reference check on somebody, oh, Mark, this individual is wonderful. When he or she doesn't know something, they go home and they watch YouTubes and they really learn about the thing. They come back the next morning and they're ready to tackle the world. So we're looking for the approach to things. How do people manage and act in a consequential type of a role? And you can tell a lot of that, whether or not they're that dedicated to, like you said earlier, drive themselves to read a book instead of, something else that may not be as important to their careers. So there's a lot that comes out of these conversations and these interviews that not necessarily down on paper, but you infer things and then you, as a good interviewer, you probe further and say, well, tell me about a time where something that you did failed. What happened? Because you want to see how they handle that. They
Yeah.
might say, well, I banged my head up against the wall and I screamed and I threw things. We don't want that. But they might say, well, you know what? Failing is a good thing because you learn from it. So when I failed, I immediately went to find out how I could do it better next time. So these are kind of the soft skills. These are the
Yeah.
things that learning soft skills brings you to because you know how to handle certain situations. You don't want to be caught with that moment. You want to always be prepared. And you don't want to come off as somebody who's overconfident either. You got to balance it, but you do want to come off somebody that has good common sense and is truthful and honest. And this is me. These are the things I'm good at. These are the things I may not be as good at. But I do have a real passion for this industry because either my dad was an engineer and I want to be like him, or I've always liked sci-fi movies because when I watched one, I always looked at the apparatus on the deck of the starship or whatever the case may be. Make a convincing point that this is not just a job for you, but it's a passion, it's a calling. Kind of like you asked me earlier about broadcasting and getting into what I do. For me now, this is a passion. I just even at this stage of my career, I just want to keep getting better and better because I know when I do that, I'm going to hire some really great people, and then I get to since I'm in learning and development, I get to watch them grow, and
Yeah.
that's very rewarding to see somebody that you hired or helped hire 2 or 3 years ago. They've already made manager in 6 months or a year because they had something special.
Yeah. And the passion shows, especially from showing up on a podcast like this, or obviously from the way you describe the work you do, the passion does show. Last one about a resume. If you're seeing an application come in from an engineering prospective engineering intern, do you expect to see anything from high school on their resume?
If it's relevant, if they were maybe in the Boy Scouts or some Explorer programs, if they were in something like that, or the first program for robotics, there are a
Yeah.
lot of kids that love that. What that tells us is that you didn't make this up in junior year of college when you had to declare a major. You actually wanted to do this and you went to college for that. And, I'll ask them, do you think that your college experience was worthwhile? Did you learn what you thought? Is it the field that you think you still want to be in today after having gone through it? You listen for that passion and they say, I was in that first program as a seventh grader or an eighth grader. And, I was the kind of kid growing up that I had all the scientific toys. Uh, these are the things that really tell you about somebody's true interest. Because in any job, there are going to be good and bad days. You got to survive the bad days. You got to be able to say, well, I know tomorrow's going to be better and I'm going to work on this, that, and the other thing. And, I love this so much that I'm willing to sacrifice a day or two where things didn't go well because I know tomorrow's going to be a better day.
It's interesting because a lot of one of the this most difficult points of feedback that I got whenever I was, um, first coming out of high school, early college student is like, kill all that stuff from your resume. But obviously, if it makes sense, if you did like the car race, the Matchbox car races, or you're part of your high school's amateur rocketry program, obviously that's the kind of stuff that's interesting. Maybe not as interested in that you ran cross country. I mean, that does tell us something about you, but definitely the stuff that ties to the passion. I do appreciate that you still want to see that on a resume,
And,
which is
and
good.
don't go overboard with it. It doesn't need a
Yeah.
paragraph. Just a listing would be enough.
Yeah, exactly. It shouldn't be the focus of your resume at that point, for sure.
And it should be
So,
down near the bottom. Remember
yeah,
that first 5 to 7 seconds of attention. Don't load that stuff up near the top because now you're saying, I don't have much to offer. So this is what I've got and I got to put it up top. It's
yeah,
like, okay, this is another nice thing. That's kind of the way we see it. It's another nice thing. It shows that there was interest early on and, that you have that sort of a mind. Maybe you're not the person that writes poetry, but you're the person that invents things. That's kind of the message it sends. And just that making a note of it that, in 1999, you were in the first program. That's probably all because we know what that is and we know what it
yeah,
means.
yeah.
Thank you so much for watching this segment of the Engineering Success Podcast. If you liked it, make sure to
Still
check out
playing in the basement while I'm working on arrangements. They heard the kid in 50 countries, thank God that's amazing. But I'd rather thank Spotify, they put me on
Really
the
appreciate
station.
it. It's free to you and helps us a lot out. And last but not least, the best way to help the show grow is to comment down below. So leave your comment if you have any thoughts about this segment. Thanks.